Creek Massacre, the atrocity that sparked Red Cloud's resistance. Kill and scalp all big and small. Nits make lice. These were Colonel Chivington's orders. Before his men slaughtered 150 innocent Native American women, children, and elders at Sand Creek in 1864. Despite the victims flying white flags and American flags as peace symbols, they were shown no mercy. The U.S. soldiers even mutilated the bodies afterward. When news of this atrocity reached the Oglala Lakota chief Red Cloud, something changed in him forever. The origins of the Sioux Nation, first contacts and cultural foundations, 1500s to 1700s, to understand the conflict that would eventually transform Red Cloud from a tribal war chief into a military strategist who defeated the United States Army. We must first journey back to the earliest days of the Sioux Nation. The Sand Creek Massacre was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of centuries of cultural collision that began long before the United States even existed. In the early 1500s, the tribes of the Council of Seven Fires migrated northward, establishing settlements in the dense forests of what would later become northern Minnesota. These woodland people lived in relative isolation, their primary conflicts occurring with neighboring Algonquian tribes to their east. However, their most formidable adversaries proved to be the Chippewa people, who dubbed these newcomers Sioux, a term often translated as little snakes or used to describe serpentine movements. They moved through the forest like water between stones, a Chippewa elder reportedly said of their new neighbors. Silent and deadly like small snakes, the Sioux developed a distinct culture, adapted to forest life. When French fur traders and trappers first encountered these tribes, they found people living with Stone Age technology. The Sioux crafted tools from stone and animal bone, practiced body painting as their primary art form, and hunted with bows and arrows and spears. They gathered plants for food, but did not practice agriculture, pottery making, or basket weaving. One French trader wrote in his journal, "These forest people know nothing of gunpowder or the sound of cannon. They travel entirely by foot, having never seen horses, and used dogs to carry their burdens." To the French, the Sioux appeared primitive. To the Sioux, the French were equally strange. Pale-skinned figures wearing unusual clothing and speaking incomprehensible languages. This mutual cultural shock marked the beginning of a relationship that would transform both societies. By the late 1600s, the balance of power began shifting dramatically. The Algonquin tribes acquired firearms through trade with English colonists and turned these new weapons against their Sioux enemies. The thunderous power of guns gave the Algonquin and Chippewa a decisive advantage. A Sioux warrior from this period recalled, "Our arrows flew true, but their thunder sticks killed. From distances our bows could not reach. Many of our bravest fell before they could count coup." Under mounting pressure, the Algonquin and Chippewa gradually pushed the Sioux southward and westward out of the forests and onto the grasslands of southwestern Minnesota. This forced migration fundamentally altered Sioux society and set the stage for their eventual transformation into the feared horsemen of the plains. The early 1700s brought the Sioux to a critical juncture. The Council of Seven Fires gathered to decide whether to remain in their new territory or continue westward. After heated debate, at least 3 tribes, including the Lakota, chose to press further west. This decision split the Sioux Nation into the eastern and western Sioux, forever altering their historical trajectory. As the western tribes moved toward the Dakotas, they subdivided into 7 bands: the Oglala Brule, Minneconjou Honk Papa, Sancerta Kettle, and Blackfeet Sioux, reflecting their spiritual belief in the mystical power of the number 7. Though they had witnessed the devastating effectiveness of firearms during conflicts with the Algonquin and Chippewa, these bands had not yet fully embraced guns as essential weapons. An Oglala elder explained their reasoning. "The thunderstick requires the white man's powder, and metal balls. A bow requires only wood and sinew. Which weapon makes a warrior truly independent?" This cultural independence would soon be tested as the Sioux encountered new technologies and peoples that would transform their society even more dramatically than firearms had. The arrival of horses would soon convert these forest-dwelling people into the legendary mounted warriors of the Great Plains. setting the stage for Red Cloud's rise to power and his eventual confrontation with the expanding American nation. The arrival of horses and cultural transformation. Mid to late 1700s, approximately 70 to 80 years after their first encounters with firearms, the Sioux acquired a four-legged creature that would revolutionize their culture far more profoundly than guns ever did. This swift animal, running like the wind across the plains, would transform not only the Sioux, but virtually every tribe west of the Mississippi River. The story of how horses reached the Great Plains begins centuries earlier and thousands of miles away. In 711 CE, Moorish armies from North Africa invaded Spain, bringing with them a breed of horses, smaller and faster than their European counterparts. For the next 800 years, Christian armies fought to reclaim Spanish territories from the Moors, constantly confronted by these superior mounts. In 1492, as Spain finally defeated the last Islamic kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula, they simultaneously funded Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. This coincidence of timing would have monumental consequences for the indigenous peoples of North America. Following Columbus's arrival, Spanish conquistadors brought their horses to the New World. During their rapid conquests, a Spanish chronicler noted, "Our horses strike terror in the hearts of the natives. They believe horse and rider to be a single beast, like the centaurs of ancient myth." As Spanish colonization pushed northward from Mexico into the vast territory stretching from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, they brought their equine companions with them. The Spanish regime was brutal, enslaving native populations and forcing conversion to Christianity through violence and intimidation. In 1680, the Pueblo people of what is now New Mexico had endured enough. They orchestrated a massive uprising, killing Spanish colonizers, destroying religious symbols, and critically, releasing thousands of horses into the wild. This event, later called the Great Horse Dispersal, gave birth to the North American Mustang and catalyzed a cultural revolution across the West. "When the four-legged spirit came to us," recounted an elderly Comanche warrior years later, "we became a different people. Before we crawled on the earth. After we flew across it, the horses spread rapidly. Through indigenous trade networks, tribes like the Apache Kiowa, Comanche Shoshone, and Cheyenne acquired horses decades before the Sioux, giving them military advantages and transforming their hunting practices. By the 1770s and 1780s, the Cheyenne began trading horses to the Sioux, who quickly recognized their value. The integration of horses into Sioux society happened with remarkable speed. Hunting practices that had remained largely unchanged for centuries were completely reinvented. Buffalo hunts that once required elaborate group coordination and dangerous foot pursuits became more efficient and less perilous. A Lakota hunter described the transformation. Before the horse, 10 men might risk their lives to kill one buffalo. With horses, one man could take many buffalo and return safely to his family. The horse revolutionized Sioux warfare as well. Mounted warriors could strike quickly and retreat before enemies could respond. Raids could be conducted over longer distances. Entire communities became more mobile, able to follow buffalo herds and avoid enemies with unprecedented freedom. Interestingly, this monumental shift in Plains Indian culture coincided with another revolutionary moment happening far to the east. While the Sioux were incorporating horses into their society, the 13 American colonies were fighting for independence from Britain. This conflict, which would give birth to the United States, was virtually unknown to the Sioux and held no significance for them at the time. This parallel development of two distinct cultures, one embracing an animal that would define their way of life, the other forming a nation that would eventually threaten that very existence, represents one of history's most consequential coincidences. Sioux had no way of knowing that the distant conflict on the eastern seaboard would eventually produce a nation whose westward expansion would threaten everything they were building for now. The horse was transforming them into one of the most formidable indigenous forces on the continent, creating the cultural foundation from which leaders like Red Cloud would eventually emerge. The rise of Red Cloud. Early 1800s, mid-1850s, the night sky erupted with streaks of light as Lone Man, a brutal Lakota warrior, stood transfixed alongside his fellow tribesmen. The meteor shower of early May 1821 painted the heavens with fire, a sign the elders interpreted as powerful medicine. "The spirits speak to us tonight," whispered an old medicine man, his weathered face illuminated by the celestial display. "They prepare us for something great." Days later, Lone Man's wife gave birth to their first son, looking down at the infant with eyes that seemed to reflect a recent fire in the sky. Lone Man declared he will be called Red Cloud, for he was born under the burning stars. None could have known this child would one day become the most formidable military leader the Lakota had ever produced, a man who would accomplish what many thought impossible. Red Cloud's early years were marked by hardship. In 1825, when the boy was just 4 years old, his father succumbed to alcohol addiction, a growing problem introduced by white traders. His mother gathered her 3 children and returned to her Oglala band, where her relative Old Smoke served as chief. "Your father's path ended in darkness," Old Smoke told young Red Cloud one evening, beside the council fire, "but you need not follow it. I will show you a warrior's way." Old Smoke and his brother White Hawk became Red Cloud's surrogate fathers. Under their guidance, the boy developed into a skilled hunter and warrior. He learned to fire arrows with deadly accuracy from horseback, a skill he practiced relentlessly. A Lakota warrior could loose half a dozen arrows in the time it took a white soldier to reload. His flintlock rifle hit the target again. White Hawk would command as Red Cloud practiced. A warrior who misses might as well stay. In the women's lodge, the boy absorbed not just martial skills, but also the sacred traditions of his people. He learned the mythology of the Lakota, including the tales of Iktom the trickster, Spider, and the story of Wind Cave in the Black Hills. The place his people considered the heart of everything. That is, as Red Cloud grew, so did his reputation for ferocity. By 16, he had claimed his first war trophy in a raid against the Pawnee, counting coup on an enemy warrior. "I touched him with my lance before taking his scalp," Red Cloud boasted to his fellow young warriors. "He saw my face before he died." The young man grew tall and powerful, developing a commanding presence that others naturally followed. His raids against rival tribes became legendary for their success and brutality. When his uncle White Hawk was killed in battle, Red Cloud assumed leadership of the warrior society within the Oglala band despite his youth. In his early 20s, Red Cloud's position was challenged by a rival from another band. The confrontation ended with Red Cloud killing his opponent in single combat, cementing the Oglala as the largest and most powerful band among the Western Sioux. With Red Cloud as their de facto war leader, the other chiefs speak of peace and ceremonies. An elder observed, "But when the warriors prepare for battle, they look to Red Cloud." Personal tragedy struck when Red Cloud found himself torn between 2 women, Pine Leaf and Pretty Owl, though his heart belonged to Pine Leaf. His father's brutal heritage and shameful death from alcoholism hindered his advancement within the Oglala tribe. To strengthen his position, Red Cloud married Pretty Owl, who came from a more prestigious family. After the wedding ceremony, Red Cloud discovered that Pine Leaf, in her despair, had taken her own life. He carried this sorrow silently, channeling his grief into an even more determined leadership style. "I see you still look to the hills where she rests," Old Smoke said to him one day. "I look to all our lands," Red Cloud replied, "and I see strangers coming who do not respect them." By the 1840s, white migration across Lakota territory had increased dramatically. Wagon trains crossed the plains in growing numbers, following what the whites called the Oregon Trail, but what the Lakota knew as an invasion route, cutting through their hunting grounds. In 1848, the United States boldly declared sovereignty over all lands from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and from Canada to Mexico, territories that included the ancestral homes of hundreds of tribes who had never agreed to such claims. White prospectors traversed Lakota and Cheyenne lands in search of gold. When they trespassed, they often paid with their lives. Migrants reported seeing human bones scattered across the prairie, grim warnings they chose to ignore. More disturbing to the Lakota were the white hunters, who killed buffalo only for their hides. leaving the meat to rot on the plains. This wasteful practice not only threatened their food supply, but violated the sacred relationship between hunter and prey. They kill without thanks or prayer. Red Cloud told his warriors, "They take only skin and leave the buffalo's spirit," crying this cannot continue. In 1849, the United States purchased a small trading post in eastern Wyoming called Fort John, renaming it Fort Laramie. This military presence signaled a new phase in the American expansion. 2 years later, in 1851, a massive council was convened at Fort Laramie to negotiate treaties with the Northern Plains tribes. Nearly 10,000 indigenous people gathered, including 30-year-old Red Cloud, 20-year-old Sitting Bull, and 11-year-old Crazy Horse, 3 men whose names would become synonymous with resistance. The U.S. representatives acknowledged that white settlers were killing buffalo and destroying grasslands. They offered $50,000 annually as compensation for allowing passage and establishing small forts. In exchange, the tribes were asked to define their territorial boundaries and appoint representatives to negotiate with the government. During the council discussions, Red Cloud observed quietly as older chiefs responded to these proposals. "They asked us to draw lines on the earth." One elder said, "How can one own the land? It would be like owning the air or the rain." Another chief added, "They want one voice to speak for all bands. But we are many voices, many fires. No one man can speak for all." Nevertheless, the chiefs signed the treaty. Viewing it more as a gift-giving ceremony than a binding agreement, they accepted the presents and returned to their territories, unaware of the legal implications. In the white man's world, tensions escalated in 1853 when conflict erupted between soldiers and a Lakota band called the Miniconjou near Fort Laramie, resulting in casualties on both sides. The following year, 30 white soldiers attacked a Lakota camp. The combined forces of Oglala, Brule, and many Conjou warriors surrounded and killed all of them. This marked Red Cloud's first killing of white men. "Their blood is no different than that of the Pawnee or Crow," Red Cloud told his warriors afterward. "They died just as easily the summer after." Miniconjou and Brule warriors, under Spotted Tail's leadership, attacked multiple wagon trains, killing settlers and burning wagons. During this period, Red Cloud was honored as a chieftain in the Oglala camps, a position that put him on the path to becoming a principal leader. The U.S. Army appointed Colonel William Harney to command the region around Fort Laramie. The Lakota called him Mad Bear for his notorious hatred of indigenous people. Harney ordered all bands in the area to move to Fort Laramie. When one band remained behind to hunt, Harney led 600 soldiers in an attack, killing 86 people and capturing 70 others in what was officially called the Battle of Ash Creek, but was essentially a massacre of a peaceful camp. They killed women gathering berries, reported a survivor who made it to Red Cloud's camp. They shot children running to hide. This was no battle. The following spring, Harney nullified the 5-year-old Fort Laramie Treaty, ordering tribes to stay away from the Oregon Trail and declaring U.S. ownership of the western half of North and South Dakota and Nebraska, including the sacred Black Hills. That autumn, Lakota messengers traveled to all western Sioux bands with a message: prepare for a great council to unite against the white threat. Red Cloud, now recognized as one of the most influential war leaders, would play a central role in what was to come. As he prepared for the council, Red Cloud looked toward the Black Hills, the heart of his people's world, and made a silent vow. Unlike his father, who had succumbed to the white man's alcohol, he would resist their encroachment. With every fiber of his being, the child born under a meteor shower was about to become the storm that would shake the American frontier to its core. The rise of resistance. Late 1850s, mid-1860s, the August sun beat down mercilessly as thousands of Sioux warriors and their families converged along the Belfast River near Bear Butte. In 1857, teepees stretched for miles, smoke from countless cooking fires rising into the clear Dakota sky. 3/4 of the western Sioux Nation had answered the call to council, the largest gathering in a generation. Red Cloud, now a formidable war chief in his mid-30s, rode through the massive encampment on his favorite war horse, a spotted Mustang captured from the Crow. his face weathered by years of plains warfare, remained impassive as he nodded to warriors from distant bands. The air hummed with tension as he dismounted near the central council. Fire inside the great council lodge. Over 100 chiefs and war leaders sat in concentric circles. Red Cloud took his place directly across from Sitting Bull, the rising Hunkpapa leader whose piercing gaze matched his own in intensity. Between them the council fire crackled. When Red Cloud addressed the gathering, he spoke forcefully about the white men, coming like locusts across their hunting grounds, killing buffalo, building forts, bringing diseases, and claiming even their sacred hills. He advocated for immediate strikes to drive them back across the great river and kill any who dared set foot on Lakota land. Many younger warriors murmured their approval. Sitting Bull supported Red Cloud's position, noting that the whites made promises with one hand while holding a knife behind their back with the other. However, elder chiefs like Conquering Bear urged caution, reminding everyone that the whites had many guns and soldiers who would come like ants from a disturbed hill. If provoked, the debate continued through the night until near dawn, when a young warrior named Crazy Horse stepped forward. Though only 16, his reputation had already spread through the Sioux Nation. His light hair and skin, unusual among the Lakota, gave him an otherworldly appearance that matched his quiet intensity. Crazy Horse informed the council about new weapons. Some soldiers carried revolvers that could fire multiple times without reloading, making them deadly efficient against warriors with traditional weapons. After 3 days of deliberation, the council reached a compromise. There would be no coordinated large-scale attacks. For now, individual warrior bands could decide their own actions, but two principles were unanimously agreed upon. The Black Hills would be defended at all costs, and each band would protect its hunting grounds. To the death, Red Cloud rode away dissatisfied, but resigned to bide his time. By 1860, the threat Red Cloud had warned about was materializing. Faster than anyone had predicted, America's population had swelled to 31 million, with 90% living east of the Mississippi. When gold was discovered near Cherry Creek in Colorado, on southern Cheyenne and Arapaho land, prospectors flooded the region. The boomtown of Denver sprouted like a weed, where only prairie grass had grown before. Similar discoveries in Nevada and Montana drew thousands more westward. The Oregon Trail became so heavily trafficked that the Pony Express established regular mail service, with riders galloping directly through Sioux hunting grounds. Red Cloud watched these developments with growing alarm. In 1861, war erupted in the eastern United States between Union and Confederate forces. Red Cloud received this news from traitors with a mixture of satisfaction and calculation. Many soldiers stationed in western forts were being recalled east, creating a temporary power vacuum. The summer of 1862 brought news that the eastern Sioux in Minnesota had risen up against white settlements, killing hundreds before being brutally suppressed. The American response was swift and merciless. 38 Lakota men were hanged simultaneously in the largest mass execution in American history. Red Cloud gathered his warriors to recount the story, warning them that this was the fate that awaited them if they surrendered. Better to die fighting on their own land than swinging from American ropes. On January 1, 1863, the American government enacted the Homestead Act, offering 160 acres of land to anyone willing to live on and improve it for 5 years. The fact that this land already belonged to indigenous nations was conveniently ignored. Nearly 300,000 settlers began moving westward, their wagons cutting deeper scars into the prairie. During this period, Red Cloud and his Oglala warriors had successfully driven the Crow from the Powder River country, a vast game-rich territory encompassing northeastern Wyoming and southeastern Montana. This became Red Cloud's most valued hunting ground, and he enjoyed relative freedom from white interference in this remote region. The peace would not last. In spring 1864, refugees from Colorado arrived at Red Cloud's camps with alarming news: a U.S. volunteer unit had attacked for Cheyenne villages. Without provocation, in response, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho warriors had begun retaliating against any whites they encountered. Red Cloud sat stone-faced. As a young Cheyenne warrior described the escalating violence, The warrior's right arm ended in a freshly healed stump, lost to a soldier's bullet. He described how they had struck at farms, burned stage stations, and killed travelers on the roads, temporarily cutting off movement. Between Fort Leavenworth and Denver, the warrior recounted how soldiers had attacked a Cheyenne village and killed Chief Lean Bear, who was wearing a peace medal given to him by President Abraham Lincoln. Linbar had walked toward the soldiers with the medal displayed on his chest, believing it would protect him. The soldiers shot him multiple times as he approached. 3 weeks later, the Hungate family, a settler, his wife, and their 2 young children, were killed near Denver. Their mutilated bodies were displayed in the city center for all residents to see, including the dead children, placed in deep glass boxes, inflaming hatred against the native tribes. Territorial Governor John Evans, seizing the opportunity, organized a regiment of volunteer cavalry, specifically to hunt down and kill hostile natives. He placed Colonel John Milton Chivington in command, a former Methodist minister known for his declaration that it was right and honorable to use any means to kill Indians. Chivington instructed his men to kill and scalp all, big and small, using the chilling phrase, "Nits make lice," to justify killing children. Meanwhile, the commander of a fort southeast of Denver brought several Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders to the negotiating table. Major Edward Wynkoop reached a preliminary agreement with Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle and others who sought peace. When these leaders met with Governor Evans, he told them bluntly that they were at war with the United States and must make arrangements with Colonel Chivington. Chivington demanded they surrender to Major Wynkoop at Fort Lanyon if they wanted peace, implying that any natives not at Fort Lanyon would be considered hostile. Approximately 750 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, believing they had reached an understanding with the Americans, began gathering in the area around Fort Lyon. Many were elderly women and children, as most warriors remained out hunting. Unknown to them, a new commander had arrived at the fort, and Colonel Chivington was secretly moving his volunteer cavalry toward the outpost, his men riding through the night with their horses, hooves muffled by the soft prairie soil. Dawn broke cold and clear on November 29, 1864. In the Cheyenne and Arapaho camp along Sand Creek, families still slept in their teepees. Smoke from the previous night's fires rose lazily into the morning air. Children who had awakened early played quietly near the stream. Chief Black Kettle stood outside his lodge, raising both an American flag and a white flag on a tall pole, symbols of peace and his protected status. He had been assured by the fort commander that these flags would keep his people safe. The peace was shattered when a sentry cried out in alarm. The thunder of hundreds of hooves broke the morning calm as Chivington's 750 men appeared on the ridge above the camp. Without warning or negotiation, Chivington raised his saber and ordered the attack. The volunteer soldiers, many of them drunk from the previous night's preparations, charged down the slope toward the defenseless village. They fired indiscriminately into teepees, cutting down people as they emerged, confused from their lodges. Black Kettle shouted for his people to run to the creek, directing women and children toward the shallow stream of Sand Creek. Women grabbed their infants and fled toward the water, while older children ran ahead. The soldiers pursued them, shooting into their backs as they ran. Some women fell to their knees holding up their babies, pleading for mercy. The soldiers shot through the infants to kill the mothers. A handful of warriors who had remained in camp grabbed weapons and formed a desperate defensive line, trying to buy time for the others to escape. From behind hastily formed barricades of overturned wagons and lodge poles, they fired arrows and the few guns they possessed at the advancing soldiers. Elder Chief White Antelope, who had been among the peace delegation, chose not to flee instead. He stood singing his death song as the soldiers approached. Nothing lives long, only the earth and the mountains. The soldiers cut him down, then mutilated his body, cutting off ears and other body parts as souvenirs. In the creek bed, people frantically dug into the sandy banks with bare hands, trying to create shallow pits for protection. Mothers pressed their children into these depressions, covering them with their own bodies. For 2 hours, the few warriors who had stayed behind fought desperately against overwhelming odds. One by one they fell, By mid-morning, the shooting had largely stopped, but the horror continued. Chivington's men moved methodically through the camp, finishing off the wounded with pistol shots or clubs. They scalped the dead, including women and children, and cut off body parts as trophies. One of Chivington's own men later reported seeing a pregnant woman cut open, with her unborn child lying beside her, an atrocity that sickened even some of the attackers. Black Heddle somehow survived, escaping with his wife. Despite her being shot 9 times, they made their way to the warriors' hunting camp to bring the terrible news. In total, more than 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people were killed, approximately 150 of them women, children, and elderly. When survivors reached Red Cloud's camp weeks later, they recounted the massacre in excruciating detail. As he listened, Red Cloud's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. The council fire burned low as the stories continued into the night. When the last survivor had spoken, a profound silence fell over the assembly. Red Cloud rose slowly, his decision made. 8 years earlier, he had urged immediate attacks against white encroachment, but had been overruled in favor of caution. Now patience was no longer an option. He declared that the whites understood only one language, and the time had come to speak to them in that language through the winter of 1864 to 1865. As Civil War battles raged in the East, Red Cloud prepared for his own war in the West. Messengers rode to every Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho camp carrying wampum belts, signifying alliance and war. Warriors who arrived at his camp found Red Cloud transformed, no longer just a war chief, but a military strategist with a comprehensive vision. By spring 1865, his army had swelled with warriors seeking vengeance for Sand Creek. Red Cloud convened war councils, assigned raid leaders, and laid out battle plans. With a sophistication that surprised even his closest allies, he informed his war chiefs that they would not fight as expected, not charge guns as hoped, but would make the very land fight for them. That summer, as the American Civil War drew to a close in the East, Red Cloud's warriors fired the first shots of what would become known as Red Cloud's War, the only war against the United States that Native Americans would ever win.